You ever get that feeling like a story just sticks with you, it gets under your skin, like something's not quite right, just out of sight?
Well, we're diving into one of those stories today, a case that's really unsettling, even though it played out on TV, but it kind of reflects some pretty real anxieties we have out here in the real world.
It's interesting, right? How a story just made up for entertainment can hit on these raw nerves. Like, how much do governments keep from us? Can we trust big companies to do the right thing? And that feeling, that we're not getting the whole picture, that's real stuff. Exactly. We've been digging into this episode from a show a lot of you probably know, and it's wild how they took this contained thriller plot and made it about these bigger fears, like unsettling fears we all share. So we're going to unpack this whole thing, how the outbreak started, how the investigation went sideways, and some seriously weird details that honestly blur the line between fiction and, well, what could actually happen. So if you'd ever had that feeling, like the official story is not the whole story, or if you've ever been kind of creeped out by what corporations are up to, this one's for you.
That feeling, right? Like what you see isn't the whole story. That's what this episode plays on. It shows how those fears, they can pop up in the most ordinary places.
Okay, so picture this. Deep in the Costa Rican rainforest, super humid, you know the vibe. This entomologist, Robert Torrance, he finds a dead boar, but it's covered in these weird purple pustules, things you don't want to see on a dead animal. And wouldn't you know it, his curiosity gets the better of him.
Of course. Classic horror movie setup, right?
Oh, totally. So one of these pustules bursts and he gets exposed.
And that's when things get real. Really bad. By nightfall, this guy's covered in boils. He's desperate, trying to get help. When the soldiers finally find him the next morning, he's dead. Just like that. It really hits you with how dangerous this thing is.
But then the story gets even weirder. We shift to Dinwiddie County, Virginia. There's a prison there. And another man, also named Robert Torrance, gets this package in the mail. It's a piece of meat.
Okay, this is already sounding suspicious.
Right, but here's the thing. The meat's infected. A pustule breaks open, and just like the entomologist, this Robert Torrance dies super fast within like 36 hours.
Two guys, same name, both dead from this weird, gruesome thing. That can't be a coincidence, can it?
You're telling me. It's like alarm bells start going off. Something's definitely up. And that's when our investigators get called in. The classic duo, one's open to the strange and unusual, the other's all about the science, the facts. They're there to look into what seems like, at first, a pretty straightforward prison escape.
Prison break. Sounds simple enough, right?
Right. Two inmates, Paul and Steve, they were cleaning the dead inmate's cell and they just walked out. Poof, gone.
But if it was that easy, why is the whole place on lockdown? CDC, National Guard, the works, that screams something way more serious is going down, something they got to contain, like on a national level.
Exactly. So while the skeptical one, we'll call her Scully, she starts digging into what's really happening inside that quarantined prison. The other one, we can call him Mulder, he's out with the U.S. Marshals hunting down those escaped inmates because now they're not just escapees, they're potentially carrying something way more dangerous.
So double the trouble now. Got a potential outbreak and two guys on the loose who might be spreading it.
Yep. Meanwhile, inside the prison, Scully's investigation takes a dark turn, like really dark. She finds out that a ton of inmates are infected. She walks in on this scene, stacks of body bags ready to be incinerated. It's not just a few cases, it's a full-blown epidemic contained inside those walls.
Oh man, that's the stuff in nightmares, right? Trapped with a deadly disease, nowhere to go.
And then when she's examining the body of that first inmate, the Robert Torrance who got the package, she runs into the CDC doctor, Dr. Osborne, and he's like actively trying to block her investigation. But then, in this seriously gruesome moment, a pustule on the dead inmate bursts and sprays Osborne right in the face. Talk about bad timing.
Oh, wow. I bet even Scully, with all her scientific coolness, had to take a step back from that one.
Yeah.
You know, this thing is so contagious, it gets the CDC guy. That's scary.
No kidding. And from there, Scully manages to connect the infected package back to this big pharmaceutical company, Pink Pharmaceuticals, and she finds a weird insect just embedded in one of the dead inmates. So now it's not just a random outbreak, it's starting to look like something more planned, more sinister.
Okay, so we've got a suspicious company, a dead entomologist, a prison full of infected people. This is getting complicated.
Yeah, it's about to get even crazier because Dr. Osborne, who's now clearly getting sicker by the minute, he drops a bombshell. He tells Scully he doesn't actually work for the CDC, he's employed by Pink. and he identifies that weird bug, Falcipaga emasculata. He says it's a parasite, but Pink was researching it for a dilating enzyme it produces.
Wait, so the company was researching this bug that carries a deadly disease?
Yeah, and Osborn says this bug also carries a deadly protozoan. Think of it like the parasite is this little invader, right? And the enzyme is the key. It unlocks the cells, lets the protozoan in.
That's horrifying, and honestly, kind of brilliant.
Right. But here's the truly disturbing part. Osborn claims Pink deliberately put that infected insect and the disease into the prison.
Hold on. They intentionally infected these people.
Yeah.
As an experiment.
That's what he says. And it's a punch to the gut. It plays on all our fears about these huge corporations, about them putting profit over human life. I mean, the idea that they might unleash a deadly disease on purpose, that's chilling.
Yeah, no kidding. It makes you think, right?
Yeah.
About how much power these companies have and whether they can be trusted.
Totally. And meanwhile, our escaped inmates, Paul and Steve, they're on the run and things are getting desperate. They end up killing someone, stealing a camper van, and Paul calls his girlfriend Elizabeth looking for help.
They're running blind, scared, probably starting to feel the effects of the infection. Not a good combination.
And involving Elizabeth. That was a huge mistake because they show up at her place and Steve, he's in really bad shape now. The disease is taking over. And in this awful, awful scene, he dies, a pustule bursts, and Elizabeth gets sprayed.
Oh, man. So now she's infected, too.
Yeah. This virus, it just doesn't let up. It spreads so easily, it's terrifying.
It really drives home how dangerous this outbreak is. And now it's not just contained in the prison, it's out in the world.
And it gets worse. Mulder and the marshals, they raid Elizabeth's house and arrest her, but Paul manages to get away again. He's still out there, infected and desperate.
So the threat's still out there. And Mulder, I bet he's putting the pieces together, starting to see the bigger picture.
Absolutely. He goes straight to his superiors, Skinner, and that super secretive smoking man. And he's convinced there's a massive cover-up happening. He's furious. He thinks the public has a right to know about this deadly disease.
Classic Mulder, right? Always fighting for the truth.
But the smoking man, he argues back, cold and calculating. He says if people knew, it would cause mass panic. He thinks it's better to control the information, keep everyone calm. And you know what? Scully, the scientist, she actually agrees with him.
Wow. Scully siding with the shadowy government guy. That's interesting. Shows how serious this situation is.
Right. It's about that balance between needing to know and the potential chaos of everyone panicking. It's a tough call.
Yeah. No easy answers there.
So they finally track Paul down to this packed bus station. He's trying to escape, scared and cornered. Mulder talks him into letting go of a teenage hostage. But just when it seems like Paul might spill the beans about Pink and what they did, the marshals shoot him. Dead.
Oh, come on. Right when he was about to talk. That's frustrating.
Seriously. It leaves you hanging, wondering what he knew, what really went down. And later, Scully comes up with a theory about the two Robert Torrances. It's cynical, but it kind of makes sense. She thinks Pink sent that package to the inmate on purpose. Same name as the entomologist, so it would look like a postal error.
So, covering their tracks, making it seem like a tragic accident instead of cold-blooded murder.
Exactly. And that's how it ends. Mulder's still determined to expose the truth, but Skinner warns him he needs proof. Going public without it could ruin his career, maybe even put him in danger. It leaves you with this feeling of unease, knowing something terrible happened, but not having all the answers.
Yeah, it's that unsettling feeling, like something's lurking just outside. It stays with you.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's go behind the scenes, explore some of the interesting stuff we found out about how this episode was made. It's like another layer to the story, a glimpse into how they brought this terrifying world to life.
I love the behind-the-scenes stuff. It's always fascinating to see how they pulled it off.
So first off, this episode wasn't made in a vacuum. The creators, they were tapping into some real anxieties from the mid-90s. There was this, undercurrent of fear about biowarfare, you know?
The Gulf War had just happened. People were worried about biological weapons. It was definitely in the air.
Our sources say Chris Carter, the guy who created the show, he was really interested in government secrecy, like what happens when there's an outbreak and how much do they tell the public? That was a big question then, and it's still relevant today.
For sure. We saw that play out with COVID, right?
Yeah.
How much information to share, when to share it. It's a tough balance.
Totally. And it's impossible to ignore the movie Outbreak, which came out just a couple of months before this episode. It was all about this deadly virus spreading like wildfire. So it's like this episode was riding that wave of fear about pandemics.
Perfect timing, really. Tapping into that collective anxiety makes it even more impactful.
Now, remember those exploding pustules? Apparently those were a nightmare for the special effects team. They had to create these prosthetics that would, like, burst open convincingly on camera.
I can imagine. Talk about a messy job.
They used these bladders filled with fake blood and stuff, and for the time, these scenes were pretty shocking, pushing the limits of what you could show on TV.
It's interesting how what's considered shocking changes over time. What was intense then might seem tame now.
For sure. And choosing a prison as the setting, that was no accident. It adds to the whole feeling of being trapped, helpless.
Yeah, the prison becomes like a symbol for this inescapable threat. You can't get away, it's everywhere.
Apparently, this episode caused some controversy behind the scenes, too. The network, Fox, they were worried about the graphic visuals and the whole idea of a pharmaceutical company being involved in something so sinister.
Yeah, it's not exactly a flattering portrayal of corporate America, is it?
It makes you think, right, about who's really in control and who benefits from these kinds of situations.
It definitely raises some uncomfortable questions about power and corruption.
It's also worth noting how this episode shaped Mulder's character. It pushed him even further down the path of distrusting authority. He's not just skeptical of the paranormal anymore, he's questioning everything.
He's always been a bit of a rebel, but this episode really solidifies his distrust of institutions. Governments, corporations, he sees them all as potentially hiding something.
And Scully, she really takes the lead on the scientific side here. It's a cool shift in their dynamic, you know? She's not just debunking Mulder's theories, she's the one figuring things out.
It shows how capable she is as a scientist. She's not afraid to get her hands dirty, to dive into the evidence.
And this episode is unique in that there's zero paranormal stuff. It's all about a real-world threat, a biological weapon, which, in a way, makes it even more disturbing.
It feels more grounded, more plausible, like this could actually happen.
And the way they show the disease, with those pustules and the internal bleeding, it's very similar to real diseases like Ebola or leishmaniasis, even smallpox. It adds to the realism, makes it hit closer to home.
Yeah, it taps into those primal fears we have about disease. It's visceral, it gets under your skin.
And the name of the disease, Fasciphaga emasculata, it's not just a random scientific name. The emasculata part has a darker meaning, like it's stripping away the victim's strength, their humanity.
It's a creepy detail, right? Like there's this hidden layer of meaning, something sinister lurking beneath the surface.
And even though it's set in Virginia and Costa Rica, they actually filmed most of it in British Columbia, around Vancouver.
Classic X-Files, right? They use British Columbia for everything.
The rainforest scenes, they shot those in the Seymour demonstration forest, which they used for other episodes too. And the gas station and the bus station, those were both the same set, a car dealership that they dressed up to look different.
It's amazing what they can do with sets and locations, how they can transform them into something completely different.
This episode also set the stage for later storylines, even for the X-Files movie. The whole idea of a corrupt pharmaceutical company, a conspiracy going all the way to the top, that comes back in a big way.
So it's not just a standalone episode, it's part of this larger tapestry of conspiracy and government cover-up that runs throughout the series.
And behind the scenes, there were some interesting perspectives. One of the directors thought those exploding pustules were a bit much, a bit over the top.
Really? I guess everyone has their limits. What one person finds terrifying, another might find silly. It's all subjective.
And the smoking man being in this episode, that was unusual. He was usually more connected to the bigger mythology of the show, not these standalone stories.
But like they wanted to signal that this episode was dealing with some bigger themes, that it was connected to the larger conspiracy at play.
Oh, and filming those pustule explosions, talk about dedication. The makeup supervisor had this whole contraption with tubes, and he had to manually trigger it to make the effect work. There's a story about him being crammed under a bus seat with actors stepping over him just to get the shot.
Wow, talk about going the extra mile. It's that kind of commitment that makes the show so memorable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth thinking about the big ideas this episode tackled. The fear of disease, the power of corporations, the struggle between truth and control. These were anxieties that were very real back then, and they're still relevant today.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder, are we any less vulnerable now than we were then? Do we have more control over our own destinies? Or are there forces at play that we're not even aware of?
It leaves you with that lingering question, right? Who do we trust? And how do we make sure the truth comes out, even when powerful people want to keep it hidden?
It's a question worth pondering for sure. And maybe, just maybe, by exploring these fictional worlds, these stories that tap into our deepest fears, we can be a little more prepared for whatever might be lurking just around the corner.
Thanks for joining us on this unsettling but hopefully insightful deep dive.